My biggest struggle with this review is going to be don't oversell this book, because I loved it. And I don't know how many people are going to share my love for a book called The Economics of the Parables. It's not an overly exciting title, but this book just might be one of my favorite books of the year. And who would have thought? The Economics of the Parables, written by author Robert Sirico, a Catholic priest. And I think one thing I've proven in my previous reviews, I'm not that much of a fan of Roman Catholic theology, but this book was great. In Economics of the Parables, Robert Sirico shows how an economically informed person might approach the parables in a reasonable and sensible way. And with reasonable and sensible insight, he draws economic lessons from the parables of Christ. And this is such an obvious thing to do when you think about it. I'm surprised it took 2,000 years into the history of the church for someone to write a book such as this. Because if you look at Jesus's parables, they are more often than not rooted in economics and the market. We have the parable of the merchant who is searching for treasures, a father who is giving an inheritance, the contrast of the rich and the poor in this life, workers in a field receiving their pay. Economics in the physical, earthly world in which we live is the foundation for many of Jesus' parables. Jesus used economic principles to teach spiritual lessons. So, to draw economic lessons from those same parables, in my view, is not only reasonable, but it is also appropriate. And Reverend Sirico's analysis and lessons drawn from the parables are insightful, wise, and beneficial to the church at large. In a time where many desire to present Christ and the church as advocates and promoters of progressive, or I'd call Marxist, economic views of socialism, Reverend Sirico shows how Christ values the free exchange of goods, the courage of the entrepreneurial spirit, the wise negotiation in a business deal, and the importance of private ownership of our possessions. Jesus illustrates how wealth is created most often not by the rich taking from the poor, but through an extension of the power of reason that has been given to us in the Imago Dei in our very nature. People in Jesus' parables create new wealth where no wealth has previously existed, by finding value where previously it was overlooked, or by sacrificing the immediate in order for a greater reward later, and through the use of privately held assets and multiplying what was originally given to someone. The powerful can abuse the poor and the weak, but Jesus' parables illustrate how we should use our gifts to increase our wealth in this world for His glory and our good. Wealth is not a sign that someone who is wealthy took from the poor, but more often in the parables, it is one who walked with wisdom to create wealth where it did not previously exist. And this book is just filled with wisdom. And I feel like I can't really put into words how much I appreciate reading on economics from a biblical perspective. Examples such as, it is a good thing that every worker should be free to make a contract for whatever terms of employment he deems appropriate for himself, and that every employer be free to make any offer he deems sustainable to his business. Whenever government gets in the way of the freedom of workers and employers, when they get between buyers and sellers, it always diminishes life instead of protecting and enhancing, as our politicians and governors may intend. Goods and services become more expensive and more out of reach for the typical person. Efforts to correct for the apparent unfairness of the market actually reward envy and make it, that is, make envy, profitable. We need to remember that Marxism and socialism are based not on fairness, but on envy. a lack of contentment, traits that should be held as anathema from the perspective of the church. Now, this review could just go on for hours, sharing quotes and comments that I loved in this book. I had so many quotes commented by the end of my Kindle that I was like, oh no, I'm going to have a review that's an hour long. But I think I just want to finish here with the following advice. If you read Economic of the Parables, don't skip the afterword at the end of the book. In the afterword, Robert Sirico deals with a lot of passages that aren't parables, but passages that are used to argue against the instructions which he brought to light in Jesus' parables. Objections to this book such as, what about the early church selling all of their goods and sharing them together? Sirico shows how this is so far removed from communism or communal living that it is ridiculous and a terrible form of eisegesis to believe that Acts 4 is actually promoting some type of socialism or communism in the church. Some claim that by Jesus driving out the money changers in his anger, that he is actually upset with the merchants who are exploiting the poor, and therefore he is against market-driven economies. And so just as Christ kicked out those money changers, we should kick out the bankers today. Again, a contextual reading of this passage shows that Jesus isn't really upset about the practice of the merchants trading and exchanging coins and selling animals for sacrifice, but it's more to deal with the location that trading is taking place. I really hope that this book gets a very wide read. It should. This should become an instant classic on how Christians view the marketplace, economics, and business. So my encouragement to you is don't miss the economics of the parables. And especially if you are at all concerned with the advance of socialism or Marxist views in the church, this even more so becomes a must-read for our times. So I highly recommend The Economics of the Parables by Reverend Robert Sirico. And if you've enjoyed this review, I would encourage you to subscribe to the Rev Reads YouTube channel. And if you want to help us continue our efforts here, we would love to have you as a patron at patreon.com/RevReads.